We have a nice list of people attending our webinar, around almost 150 people attending from our sector and other sectors available, other sectors in the field. I just as an introduction, I think you are the responsible for the plan de relance in the Belgian government. So I think most companies or all companies available are very interested to see what's the situation of the plan, where are we, and what are the actions eventually the companies can take in this framework. Later on, we will have a discussion with the people from the cabinets, and they can ask questions. So, Mr. Demin, the floor is yours for the introduction on the relance plan, and thank you very much for attending.
Thank you, Mark, and good afternoon to all. I'm very pleased to be here with you, even though it's always a bit of a pity to do it via a call conference in an event with one of the benefits is to meet each other. I believe, as you just said in your introduction words, that we are in a very special moment in our history, in a moment where actually in the aftermath of a major socio-economic and health crisis, we have a unique window of opportunity to invest, and to invest to solve some of the most pressing challenges that we have been facing, and challenges that have been there also before the coronavirus crisis. What we've done in this plan de relance, herstelplan, basically to assess what were the strategic opportunities for investment for Belgium. And we have done that exercise together with the federal government, but also with the regional entities. So with the Flemish government, with the Walloon government, and with the Brussels government. And what we've done together is basically aligning on a set of priorities for Belgium to invest within the framework of the Recovery and Resilience Facility put together by the European Union. And we have aligned on 5 priorities alongside which we will invest massively in the future. And the idea is to be extremely explicit on those priorities so that we can create predictability for private investors to move alongside public partners. So what are these priorities? We will invest first in sustainability, and in making sure that we make the investment to meet ambitious targets that are set up within the Paris Framework Agreement. So we will invest within that dimension in energy efficiency in public but also private buildings. We will invest in emerging technologies in the energy market. So that's one dimension. A second dimension is around mobility, and I guess that some of you make the experience daily around Brussels, Antwerp, or other cities in Belgium is an issue in Belgium. It's an issue, it's an environmental issue, but it's also an issue of productivity in Belgium. So we will make investments, the federal government together with regional entities, to support the modal shift which is needed in terms of mobility. A third priority in the investment framework is about the digital economy, and how can we cope with the consequences of the digital economy on the job market by building the right skills, by upskilling, by reskilling people to make sure that we address massive change on the job market that will be caused by digitization, but also building the infrastructure which is needed to support this digital transition. Infrastructure in terms of fiber connection, infrastructure in terms of 5G network, and making sure that we are ahead of this technological revolution. The fourth challenge that we will face is inclusion. So we have to make sure that we keep on investing in one of the, I would say, key characteristic of the Belgian society, which is its very inclusive model, the fact that we have a very well-performing health system, and we will keep on investing in those priorities. The fifth one and the final one is productivity. I think that you all know that the Belgian productivity has been one of the highest in Europe, but over the last few years, this productivity gap between Belgium and neighboring countries has been narrowing down. And so we must keep on investing in training, investing in giving the right incentive to companies to sustain this productivity gap that has been able to generate welfare in Belgium. I was told to discuss more specifically the investments that we're going to do in the hydrogen economy. And I will address basically two questions, and I will not make any technical comments for the very simple reason that I'm not the right expert to talk on the technology. But I will try in the few minutes that I have ahead of me to solve two questions. The first question is, why do we support hydrogen development in the Relance Plan? And knowing that we have very scarce public resources, why have we made the choice to support some of the projects that are related with the hydrogen economy? The second question that I will address is, what are the projects that we're going to support within the Relance Plan over hydrogen? And it's a bit of a primeur, because our Belgian plan has not yet been submitted nor agreed by the Commission, but I will give you a few headlines on the direction that we are taking in the Relance Plan of Belgium. So first of all, why did we decide to support investments in this emerging technology? The first reason is that we believed, and that we have discussed very intensively with my colleague Tine van der Straten and with my colleagues in the regional government. We have talked with a lot of experts, and we believe that hydrogen is a promising technology. We have done extensive reviews of emerging technologies which can have a role in our objective to achieve zero emission by 2050. And we believe, I mean, we don't know the extent, but we believe that hydrogen will be part of the solution. Secondly, we believe that there is currently a financing gap, that we have some technologies that are now ready in the lab, but there is a funding gap to bring those technologies to the market and in the first industrial development phase. And we believe that public investment alongside with private investment can help to make this switch from the lab to the industry, and to make sure that Belgium, alongside with other Western European countries, can be in a leading position on this technology. What will we fund in terms of hydrogen technology through the Plan de Relance? We will fund basically two different things. One aspect that will be financed in the Plan de Relance about hydrogen is basically the R&D and the first industrial development. And we have major projects that have been submitted by the region, because the regional governments are responsible for these industrial policy in Antwerp, in Liège, in many different parts of the country, to basically support application of the green hydrogen. The second thing that we will fund with the Plan de Relance at the federal level is the development of the backbone to capture CO2 and to transport hydrogen. Because we are now, and we are convinced that we are in a kind of chicken and egg situation where there is no business case to develop the infrastructure, but on the other side, as long as you have no infrastructure, you don't have any business case. So what we will do is not develop a massive infrastructure across the country, but we will support and we will fund the development of what is called local scale clusters across 4 different cities in Belgium, in Liège, in Charleroi, in the southern part of Belgium, in Ghent, and in Antwerp, in the northern part of Belgium. And the idea is to basically create the infrastructure within these 4 clusters in a first stage, in the very short term, with the funds of the Plan de Relance, and in a later stage to connect those different clusters. And we will work alongside with Fluxys on that dimension, and those projects are carried by my dear colleague Tine van der Straten on a daily basis. A third aspect which is worth mentioning is that we will also work on a clear regulatory framework, because we believe that just as it was needed in the gas and electricity market, a clear regulatory framework will also be a key enabler to success for the hydrogen economy. And especially in Belgium, you know that nothing is ever simple in Belgium, but we will need also a clear regulatory framework to make sure that we have full clarity on the role of the regions and the role of the federal level, and to make sure that we have a competitive level playing field also for the hydrogen economy. So with that, I will leave you there. As a word of conclusion, I believe that this Corona crisis is of course a very difficult time, a difficult time for families, for the one who have suffered from the pandemic, but also, I guess, for your companies, it's a very difficult socio-economic crisis. But the message I hope I have for you is that the Corona crisis has also created a situation in which it is a very interesting moment to think about public investment. It is a very interesting moment to think about what should we fund in terms of emerging technologies, and how can we accelerate the transition to a low carbon economy. And that's the challenge of the Plan de Relance. That's something that we are very actively working on together with the European Commission, together with my colleagues in the federal government, and together with my colleagues in the regional entities. So thank you very much, and I wish you very fruitful exchanges.
Thank you well, Mr. Domien Thomas. Thank you very much for the introduction and for lifting a tip and to give us an insight in the state of play of the plan. I think it's interesting for the companies, and to see also that the Belgian government is taking actions towards Europe, as there are important budgets that are available. And as you have a message for hope, I think it's a message for hope also for investment and for employment in our sector. So thank you very much for this introduction. For a second invitee for this afternoon is James Watson. James is the managing director, Secretary General of Eurogas since beginning 2019. So half of his career he's working at home. I think it's a 2 years career, so 1 year at home in a 2 years career. My congratulations, James. So James, when I looked at for an introduction, I always mention last times often your colleagues of Eurelectric. Even Eurelectric says, well, we're going towards a kind of an electrification of maximum 60%. So this means there at least room for at least 40% of molecules in our energy mix in the future. James, I think the floor is yours to give your viewpoint of Eurogas on the development of hydrogen and other renewable molecules for the future. James?
Thanks very much, Mark. And yeah, it's a great pleasure to be here. So I greatly appreciate the invitation on behalf of Eurogas. I also found the Secretary of State's intervention very encouraging. because I think that it's very important that we do understand exactly what you've just said, Mark. We cannot electrify our way to victory in the battle against climate change. We will need renewable and decarbonized molecules alongside electrons to deliver carbon neutral 2050. And therefore making the investments as you are proactively, should the Commission approve your plan, Secretary of State, in both carbon transport, so you can have carbon capture, and into renewable hydrogen, I think makes a lot of sense. And I can say that on the basis that indeed Eurogas has done a study last year looking into the role of molecules up to 2050. And if you'll allow me, I'll share a small presentation with you. I'm not going to take too long. I'm not going to try and bore you all to death with PowerPoint, but I think that there are some good findings of it, which I think would be useful for an understanding of where we think we would be. And just to say, Eurogas is a European association. We represent only European Union and former European Union member states amongst our membership. So we are very much dedicated to what goes on in the European Union. And I think we can start from a good point that you were mentioning, Mark, in a way that Euroelectric sees 60% electrification by 2050. It's a little bit different to the European Commission, and the European Commission is our sort of baseline, if you like, and was the baseline for our study. And what we've seen in 2018 is something called the long-term strategy, which basically focuses on how do we go from where we are today to a carbon neutral future in 2050. And the two scenarios that delivered the carbon neutrality for the European Commission in 2018 were called 1.5 Tech and 1.5 Life. 1.5 Tech is about technological innovation, and 1.5 Life is about changing life behavior, so flying less, being more vegans and eating less meat and this sort of thing. And so in Eurogas, we chose the 1.5 Tech scenario as more of our guidance, because we also see the European Commission choosing that as more of its guidance. And if you look at this bar chart, and I hope you can see my cursor, if you look at 2015, you see that gaseous fuel in the European Union in 2015 was dominated by what is natural gas. That's set to stay the same until about 2030. Slight reduction due to energy efficiency. And then I think there is a huge change between 2030 and 2050, this 1.5 Tech. Natural gas becomes a rump remaining. The carbon-free gases, which includes biomethane and waste gases, grows considerably. But this orange part that is hydrogen comes from nowhere in 2030 to being a very dominant part of the gaseous fuel mix in 2050. And so indeed, again, as Thomas was saying, we need to have the investments now to actually make that a reality, to build things like backbones, and also to set up electrolyzers to go alongside the renewable electricity we'll need. Now, Eurogas don't necessarily fully agree with the entire direction that the European Commission shows, and that's why we produced our own study. And I think to come back to your percentage point, Mark, these graphs here, this shows the rate of electricity and electrification that is expected in the 1.5 Tech scenario by the European Commission, up to 51%, from today around 21%. And the role of gaseous fuels would decline from 24% down to about 20% of the overall use. The rest, ladies and gentlemen, is made up of things like biomass, so quite a heavy reliance on it. Our view in our study, which also delivers carbon neutrality, as you see here in 2050, minus 100%. So we have the carbon neutrality that we desire, the same as the European Commission. Yet we see a more, shall we say, a binary approach where both electricity grows massively, 150%, where also gas grows by a little bit less than 50%, you could argue, up to around 30% of the energy mix by 2030. And this is actually a much more cost-effective way of delivering energy transition, because we had the whole thing costed. And this saves about 4 trillion euros if we actually are able to deliver that by 2050. And 4.1 trillion euros, you might be thinking, well, what does that mean? 4.1 trillion euros is a lot of money, because in 2018, Germany's GDP was in fact 3.85 trillion euros. And our neighbours over in Germany are a very industrious group of people, 85 million of them. They do a lot of work during a year. So it's basically saving more than the German annual economic output if you have a more balanced approach to the development of gaseous fuel and to electricity. We will need both. But what is that gaseous fuel? And so this is what we have come up with. And here again, we're comparing Eurogas here, ladies and gentlemen, to the 1.5 tech from the Commission there. Again, you will see we're relatively close on the amount of natural gas that will be in 2030. So it's clear in the next 10 years, we will still be quite reliant on natural gas. However, where we disagree, because we don't see that there will be this massive reduction of natural gas, but we do see that there will be a development of hydrogen and biomethane, is that we see the overall volume can increase of gaseous fuels. And in fact, it is very likely to. And by the way, this 11% here of gaseous fuel is commensurate with the European Commission's current idea of having 80 gigawatts of electrolyzers being deployed, 40 in Europe and 40 in Europe's neighborhood. So we're in line with the kind of views that the European Commission have in terms of their new projections of having, under the hydrogen strategy, 80 gigawatts of electrolyzers installed. Remember, when they drew this up back in 2018, they didn't have a hydrogen strategy, which didn't set targets for things like 40 gigawatts of electrolyzer deployment by 2030 and 40 gigawatts of electrolyzer deployment in the southern neighborhood, as it's called, in the southern neighborhood policy. So we think that this is actually very possible that you could see a result like this because it's in line with the newest policies that are coming up from the European Commission. In any case, at least almost 1/3 of gaseous fuel by 2050 will be hydrogen, and that will be a strong amount of hydrogen that will be consumed and used and produced, and that's an important part to think about, and will be produced here in Europe. The biggest question I think that we see today is not a question of whether or not we'll have hydrogen. I think the Secretary of State, or the State Secretary, has indeed confirmed that. One of the biggest debates is, where does the hydrogen actually go? And I think that the way that we see things is, again, similar to the European Commission, except we have bigger volumes. If you look at our study here in Eurogas, if you look at the demand columns, which are the blue ones, not so much about the production ones, although I will say, even for Eurogas, which has been traditionally a natural gas association, we see that by 2050, production from electrolysis will be the main part of hydrogen by 2050. So that's from renewable electricity. We do see, like the European Commission, that demand will be split between transport, buildings and industry. And we think that, in fact, the question about whether or not hydrogen will be used in buildings is a very important one to consider. There is an idea that we will be able to electrify heat in buildings. We will be able to do some of that, and certainly the study from Eurogas does confirm it. However, we also see that because a lot of electrolyzers today are located on the distribution system, because they have to be for technical reasons, that it's unlikely that they will be picked up and removed at a later date. Therefore, green hydrogen, as it's called, hydrogen produced from renewable electricity, produced at a distributed level, attached to the distribution system, has only one place to go, and that is buildings. The European Commission confirmed in their thinking that there would be some in buildings here. We believe it'll be bigger, almost twice as much, simply because the rate of deployment of electrolyzers is much greater now than was planned when the 1.5 tech scenario was originally released. Manufacturing and industry is also super important for the uptake of hydrogen. We are much more ambitious on the take-up of hydrogen in the next 9 years than the European Commission was in 2018. That still sees a lot of natural gas in manufacturing by 2030. We believe that because it's a cost-effective route and there are already private hydrogen networks, we can actually see a strong take-up of the hydrogen that is produced in Europe by 2030 in the industrial sector. And that in itself will drive economies of scale and allow hydrogen's costs to decrease much more rapidly than if we were waiting to find who's going to be the big off-taker. So this is one of the big differences between us and the European Commission. They're still seeing a lot of natural gas being used up to 2030 in industry, when we see a very strong development of hydrogen. We also note that they see a strong electrification towards the end by 2050. Ours is more balanced again between electricity and hydrogen. So here we are at a more of a divergence from their view of the future. It's also much cheaper, of course. The Eurogas study is delivering the objective in a much cheaper way for manufacturing, which is important because it saves EU competitiveness. So this is something that has to be taken into consideration. Using molecules and existing infrastructure is cheaper than building new infrastructure. And I can tell you, I once to say again about our good friends at Eurelectric, and they are our good friends. We enjoy a good relationship with them. They were recently asking for 400 billion euros for the next decade to upgrade the distribution grids. I can tell you that's fully in line with our estimate of what it would cost to upgrade the distribution grids per decade to 2050 to deliver the electrification that they would require. We fully agree with that. We made it come out to 1.3 trillion, theirs is 1.2 trillion to 2050. So at least on this we can agree. However, we say you don't need to do that because you can actually still use the distribution grid and the transmission system that is currently holding natural gas today in a hydrogen economy, and that will save you money and deliver your objectives. We already touched on this, so I'm going to skip over this more or less, but just to say, we see hydrogen much more prevalent in buildings by 2050 than in the European Commission scenarios. And so hydrogen, we do believe, will play an important role in the building sector for the reasons that I mentioned previously. Cost is very important. You've got a view here. If you look at the green, this is electrolysis hydrogen. Today, it's a bit less than that, actually, 58 euros megawatt hour. It's coming down all the time. We see this actually dropping for the cost of production around about 10 or 11 euros by 2050. And to tell you the truth, even our model is now out of date, even though it's 1 year old, because companies are coming forward with much lower costs, capital costs for the production of electrolyzers than we had 18 months ago when we did the modeling for this. So I think this is going to be more like we experienced in the solar sector, where we kept predicting huge reductions of cost in solar, and we were too conservative. We weren't ambitious enough. So I actually think the cost of electrolysis will come down, and it's highly likely that green hydrogen by 2050 could be close to the cost that we have of natural gas today. On the blue hydrogen, the one for reforming from natural gas with CCS, it stays fairly constant because we don't see a lot of learning, because the actual technology that used is actually it's very well established. It's a mature technology. I'm going to finish with two quick, actually I'll just skip straight to the next one with one final slide. Why can we be so positive about the future of hydrogen in Europe? When I first gave this slide 2 years ago, when I was still allowed to be in a room with you all, we had very, very little amounts of green on this. We had a lot of blue industry-led initiatives, but very little green government-led initiatives. The whole of Europe is more or less turning green on this for the time being. Since the European Commission's hydrogen strategy, we have seen pledge after pledge after pledge from governments across Europe to actually build electrolyzers by 2030. You can see this all the way through. France has done something that we fully agree with, and that is to set a volumetric target. 10% of all gas in the grid should be renewable by 2030. We in Eurogas believe in a similar target. We think there should be 11% of all gas in Europe should be renewable by 2030. And compared to 2018, we think that all gaseous fuels should have a GHG intensity reduction of 20% by 2030. So that together, these two mechanisms would deliver the gaseous fuels that we will need for the future, with a major focus on hydrogen. I must say we shouldn't forget biomethane and biogas, and indeed there's a very interesting biomethane plant not far from Antwerp. But I think, Mark, I've probably used up too much of my time already, but I'm happy to stop there and take any questions if that would suit you.
Thank you very much, James. I didn't see questions rising up in the chat, but if I see your last slide, what would be good examples for you? You already mentioned France, but I see a plethora of countries coming up. What are interesting initiatives? I see the Secretary of State is still listening, so perhaps you can give him ideas or give our government's ideas.
We strongly support the idea of volumetric targets. We think that that's a very good way to drive investment. Of course, then you as governments have the freedom to decide. This isn't going to be an EU-imposed target, if you like, to say that each member state must do this. We see it as an EU binding target, with the member states have the flexibility through their national energy and climate plans to decide how to do it. Nevertheless, we see targets as a good mechanism, because then you can design the incentive schemes that you think are necessary to drive the types of technologies you want. Now, Belgium is a producer of things like electrolyzers. You have hydrogenics here. as a job provider, and also very much a clean technology. This is the industries of the future. And we speak to the unions a lot, and the unions are very much on board with what we say, and they see that gas technologies like electrolyzer production in Europe are something we should really get behind. We think targets are a good way of making sure that you don't have to do direct industrial policy and sort of, support them at the mouth, if you like, but actually you give them the opportunity of creating the market for them to play in. And I think that's the message that I would give to the Secretary of State. I would say, this is a good model, a target for how much you can say you can make it how much electrolyzers you want, or we would prefer a general renewable gas target coupled with a greenhouse gas emission reduction target to drive the uptake of the blue hydrogen as well, so the CO2 backbone that you've talked about. This is a great way of giving the investors the absolute certainty that they know, right, that government is committed to this. If we invest in this, there will be a return on investment, and you will be absolutely sure that you will get what you need, which is the clean fuel at the end of the day. So targets are good. I mean, for Eurogas, just put it into context, that's quite an interesting departure, because we've long been the association of the market. We believe in the market forces, market should deliver. There are some times when you look at a sort of potential crisis like the climate crisis, where you say you have to intervene for some time until the market catches up with your policy priorities, because the market itself can't just pay attention to climate change. So you need that sort of intervention. We still see the importance of things like the CO2 price relating to the ETS. We have a strong belief that the ETS will be a good tool and could be expanded to things like buildings and transport. But that's more of a long-term objective. And we would say in the short term, you could imagine having taxation policies to help us get there. And then once you've got the right kind of fuels and the right kind of end uses, then you can use the ETS to sort of finish the job, if you will. So that I would say to the Secretary of State. I would say targets are good. The French example is a really good example to follow. For them, they focus on renewable gases, and it has literally doubled the deployment of biomethane and electrolyzers year on year. So there are tangible outcomes from the target.
I have one question that I saw coming in. For James, how do you reach climate neutrality if you still have a part of natural gas in 2050? I presume there you come in with the CO2 backbone and the CO2 storage.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's still, in our scenario, there's still a lot of, and we think this is actually credible, because there's a lot of natural gas in the feedstock system, if you like. There will still be methane used by industry, but also for blue hydrogen. And that natural gas will be, of course, reformed. And so you do use some, and therefore changing it into hydrogen, there is a conversion loss, of course. So you still have the production of hydrogen through what we call the blue hydrogen mechanism, through steam methane reform. What we find interesting about the European Commission's scenario is that they start ramping up more, say, in the 2030s on blue hydrogen, but then they expect it to sort of decline and disappear in 40s and 50s. And we think that once you've made that investment, it's unlikely that that will be the case. It will be displaced by more competitive green hydrogen as it comes along. We see that in our own study. As I showed you, in 2050, there will be more green hydrogen than blue. And probably that will be continued to 2060 and 70 and beyond once you've got more feedstock of renewable electricity in place. That's the limiting factor for green hydrogen, because today you don't have necessarily huge amounts of unused renewable electricity. It's variable renewable electricity is only about 20% of the EU electricity mix today. So you have to also wait for that feedstock to appear. However, natural gas is here. Natural gas is very much here. As you see, we're already around 24% of the energy mix. So that natural gas rump, which is still large in Eurogas, is because it's still feeding the blue hydrogen. And indeed, because this is net zero, you probably saw on my graph, there's still a small amount of natural gas in buildings, which will be offset through CCS from industry and other power, possibly, and other applications. So in this respect, we still see natural gas as being there. It is definitely very much more focusing on feedstock for industry and feedstock for blue hydrogen. But in some small applications, there will still be natural gas in the system.
Okay, then the last question, I think it's also an interesting one from Jo Nijens. I think we also had a slide on hydrogen and buildings, and the question is, why using that very expensive, that high quality hydrogen in buildings if the renovated buildings and the new buildings are almost energy neutral? Why use it?
I mean, it's a good question, isn't it? I mean, these are the things that policymakers are wrestling with today. The reality is that 80% of the buildings that are standing today, if not probably more because our buildings get about 80% of the buildings standing in Europe today will be standing in 2050. So maybe for 20% of the building stock, you can make them super energy efficient as a first step, which makes them more suitable for the electrification of heat. So we've got 80% still left. Those 80% today are generally using gaseous fuels for warming. Now we can make them more energy efficient, and we totally subscribe to that so that you can use less. The second point is that hydrogen may seem expensive today, but in 2050 it will not be. And that was my graph, and that's the point of the price graph that I showed. We are seeing a massive reduction in the cost of hydrogen because it will be scaled up and because it will be demanded and will be used. And this means that in fact, hydrogen will not be a premium good in 2050, it will be ubiquitous. And this is a back to the future moment for Europe. If I go back to the 1980s in Dublin, you still had town gas, which was a mixture of methane and hydrogen. If you went over to Dresden on the other side in the 80s, you would still have town gas, which is a mixture of hydrogen and methane. And our view in Eurogas is that this is entirely possible and entirely plausible. And as I explained at the very beginning, the distribution system is where the majority of that 40 gigawatts of electrolyzers is going to be put in the 2020s. And that is all dealing with low grade heat. And it's a fast way to decarbonize buildings is to put more renewable power into them. And I think that if we are or renewable fuel, I should say, into them. And I think that if we're really honest and not ideological, if the idea is to achieve carbon neutrality, we shouldn't be worrying about whether or not we are using renewable gases or renewable electricity to deliver it, as long as it's being delivered. And that is the final point, if you like. We need to be pragmatic. Upgrading the electricity grid at distribution level to deal with heating and to deal with cars, a local substation that has about 200 houses attached to it, will start struggling when you're getting to levels of penetration of around 20, 30% of both. People will start falling off the grid at the end of it. And that is a political no-go because we don't tolerate blackouts in Europe, in Western Europe anymore. So the amount of money that would then have to be spent quickly and get all of that labour in place to dig up the roads, because you will have to dig up the roads to the distribution grid, it can be done easier and quicker if we also look to green molecules as well as green electricity. These are two pillars to achieve the same objective in the most cost-effective way.
Okay, thank you very much, James. There are some more questions, but we will close it here and go to the next subject. Thank you for the interesting discussion and the interesting point of view. I think it's a confrontation or working together would be better between electricity and gas molecules for the future. Thank you very much, James, for your introduction and for the speech. Next, we have a discussion with my colleagues Christophe Schreurs and Walter Ruigrok from Energy Netherlands. Walter is responsible for production, environment and climate at Energy Netherlands. It's our sister organization, sister federation, and Christophe for renewables, gas and climate in FEBEG. I think Belgium and the Netherlands, we have similar challenges. We have densely populated countries, high concentration of industry, and together we share probably the largest chemical cluster of the world, and we have an important logistics sector. Investments in hydrogen infrastructure are very capital intensive, so this calls for an international collaboration. So that's why we wanted to have those two together. Perhaps, Christophe, first question for you. What do you think will be the role of hydrogen or molecules in general in energy transition?
Well, I love the reference that James Watson made to the back of the future moment that the European Commission is living through. Well, let me start with a quick recap on the trajectory we have known within FEBEG. As was already mentioned by you, Mark, in the introduction. Just a little bit more than a year ago, just before the lockdown, we presented our gas paper to a diverse group of stakeholders. And the approach in our gas vision was based on a number of observations. One of the first was that natural gas still plays an important role in the energy system of today. And at the same time, the energy system is disrupted by the necessity to move or evolve, however one can see it, towards significant CO2 reductions by 2030, and finally towards the objective of climate neutrality by mid-century. And therefore, our ambition with the gas paper was to reconcile sustainability, affordability, and security of supply. So in concrete terms, this means that we should not only focus on electricity, but also on energy efficiency, heating and cooling. And natural gas, but also renewable and low carbon gases can play an important role in this respect. Maybe at this point in time, it's also important to notice that we have evolved within FEBEG. Once we started with our gas vision and ended up with the hydrogen vision, what we are presenting today, we started the discussion with the terminology around natural gas, renewable and low carbon gases, but ended up with talking about molecules. It's maybe a better term to discuss in this section. We are convinced that these molecules can play an important role in the future energy system, and we see a similar evolution that we have seen in the electricity sector, in which a major switch to renewable generation has happened in the past 20 years. But to come back on your question, in order to achieve these climate objectives and at the same time safeguard sustainability, affordability, and security of supply, we probably need a variety of technologies. And one of these technologies, one of the options that are highlighted in this event, is the importance of these molecules. From our perspective, at least, these molecules are a missing link in the energy transition. This means that they are not a holy grail, neither are they a villain. And they are not a holy grail in the sense that they will not solve all our energy-related problems. This means that we should direct the molecules towards sectors that need them. And from our perspective, with our specific context in Belgium, with very energy-intensive industries, this means, in the first instance, to direct them towards the industry that have difficulties to electrify or implement energy efficiency measurements in a feasible way. We also think that these molecules will play an important role in the case of other industrial sectors. For example, in the case of feedstock or other appliances like, for example, transport. And like James has mentioned in his presentations, who knows, maybe also in buildings. But from our perspective and the position we have developed, it's mainly focus on industry and transport. Maybe one last slide to end my answer on your question. In order to do this all and to implement the role of these molecules, it's important to have a clear vision and to define clear ambitions in this perspective. And the slide we are presenting right now is very similar to the slide that James has presented in his slide pack. Our slide is a little bit more limited in the scope of the countries that we envision, but we see that our neighboring countries have high ambitions in terms of electrolyzer capacity, and we believe that it should be an ambition of Belgium as well to come to these kind of conclusions and ambitions in terms of deployment of these technologies.
Thank you very much, Christophe. It is a good introduction also for Walter, I think. Walter, in the Netherlands, I think the Netherlands have put forward already some ambitions in hydrogen electrolyzers. It's also on the slide. But what kind of a project do we see in the Netherlands? What projects are proposed? And how are these projects financed? Is there a system of support? And what's the state of play for the moment in the Netherlands? Walter, the floor is yours.
Well, let's start first with the state of play. The reason why we are working on hydrogen in the Netherlands is because industry, energy sector, mobility sector, housing sector, agriculture, together with governments, have agreed on a climate agreement for 2030 in which the Netherlands should achieve 49% CO2 reduction by 2030. And each sector should deliver its share to reach that ambition. And then looking in particular to industry, industry has to do 40 million tons of CO2 reduction by 2030. And the possibilities for CO2 reduction in industry are electrification, CCS, and hydrogen. And CCS could be a combination with hydrogen in the form of blue hydrogen. And those targets have to be achieved, and the agreement with government specifies all kinds of actions which should be taken, including a package on hydrogen. And when talking about this agreement, we have set an ambition for hydrogen, in particular on what that would mean for the green route. So through electrolysis capacity by 2030. And we came up with an ambition of 3 or 4 gigawatts by 2030, with an intermediate step by 2025 to do 500 megawatts. And this path should enable an upscaling of electrolysis capacity and bringing down costs. So the pathway is aimed at scaling up and bringing down costs in order to achieve CO2 reduction in industry. And all actions are now moving forward to achieve that. And the slide you see in front of you now is from our national gas operator Gasunie, which plans to transform a part of its natural gas network into a hydrogen backbone, connecting the 5 large industrial clusters in the Netherlands and possibly a link towards Antwerp. That hydrogen backbone should enable a transfer of hydrogen between clusters and sources of production that might be either on the North Sea or onshore. And beneath, it might be not very visible for you, but there's a sort of timeline between now and 2030 in which various projects are placed to scale up towards 3 or 4 gigawatts of green hydrogen, and also incorporating a large cluster of blue hydrogen near the port of Rotterdam. Our members, and that is on the next slide, are actively involved in bringing those projects into play. At the moment, let's say it's still in the feasibility study and planning phase, but there is a large enthusiasm in the Netherlands, and this is just a snapshot of what's going on. And it's a portfolio of projects, of smaller ones to do pilots in the build-up environment, but also larger ones on blue hydrogen, for instance, in the port of Rotterdam or in the north of the Netherlands, to use blue hydrogen to fire up a power plant there, and several projects on electrolysis capacity, including scaling up steps towards 2030. So projects are in place. The government is doing its part on preparing regulation, subsidy schemes, and what you have to facilitate this process. it's now a question of, do we do enough to achieve the targets for 2030? And there, money is the issue. So far, we have set the ambition, we have subsidy schemes in place, but the main driver for subsidy is geared towards renewables and partly to support CO2 reduction in industry. But in particular, green hydrogen is not cost effective enough to participate in that scheme. So we are now awaiting the election results of tomorrow, which will bring a new government, and the next government should have that as part of their agenda to make sufficient money available to also fund those projects to bring all these plans really into reality. So we are preparing. There is a lot going on. The interest is great. There is some money available, but the real money should come from the next government, and hopefully they will do it.
Mark, you've been muted. You are muted, Mark.
Thank you, Walter. I'll take the question of Ivo later in the discussion. Perhaps on the organization point of view, Christophe, do you think we will evaluate towards an adapted regulatory framework like gas and electricity also for hydrogen, or how it will function in the future? I hope we didn't lose Christophe.
Christophe is talking, but muted.
Okay, I hope I'm not muted anymore. This will be better normally. So what I was saying is that, like the Secretary of State also already mentioned, is that a regulatory framework is one of the key enablers for success, and we are happy to hear this. But such a framework can only help our members to develop their ambitions, and one of the key issues is, of course, a form of support, as we discussed earlier, as Walter has mentioned, and also James has mentioned. Another topic that could be the uptake of could be beneficial for the uptake of emerging technologies is a feasible CO2 price, which was also mentioned by James earlier. And I saw earlier today that the price of CO2 in the ETS system reached a record high. So this could also be one of the key enablers for levelizing the cost in that respective. There is also an ongoing discussion in relation to a non-ETS CO2 price, which is important to emphasize that it needs to be predictable in relation to the growth of the CO2 price, and that the framework should be strict in that respective. Another issue in relation to the framework, and more generally speaking, it's one of the more pressing issues for us, and that is the relation to the market roles. The parallel with the natural gas and electricity regulation is apparent. In the framework of natural gas and electricity, we see that the market roles are defined and that players have clearly defined roles. We think and we believe that this should also be applied for emerging energy markets like hydrogen. And for one of the more evident examples is that the production and supply of hydrogen, for example, should be commercial activities. In relation to storage, we adapt a more pragmatic point of view. We see that Lunard storage facilities is a regulated activity, although this is not the case across the EU. We see that a wide variety of ownership models in relation to storage are applied. And our vision is that larger storage facilities that are directly connected to grids could be regulated activities. Smaller storage facilities, like including electrolyzers, should be commercial activities. So that's from a point of view of the regulatory framework.
Thank you, Christophe. I'll go back to Walter. Walter, all those hydrogen projects, are we going to produce that hydrogen, or are you going to produce that hydrogen in the Netherlands? Your coastline is much larger, of course, than the Belgian coastline, so probably you have some more possibilities, but you also have a lot of industry. So producing within the Netherlands, outside the Netherlands, importing them, how to transport it, the importance of guarantees of origin, and I'll add the question of Ivo in it. If you talk about the 3-4 gigawatts of electrolyzers, you're talking about 10 to 15 terawatt hours of hydrogen. Do you need a backbone for that amount of hydrogen? Perhaps that's a question.
Yes. Well, first on the role of import. We are definitely looking for a role of import into the further future. Whether or not that will materialize, we'll all have to see. On the one hand, the Netherlands, and also I think the port of Antwerp, is well positioned to act as an energy port to receive imports from elsewhere. So we have the infrastructure to deal with import, and there is tremendous expertise to do that. Whether that will happen or not will depend on several factors. First of all, the demand for hydrogen, how large will that be? Secondly, what can we produce either through the blue routes or the green routes in our region ourselves? What will be the price when we do it in our region in comparison with others? And in particular for the green routes, that will be a competition issue. We have space, the Netherlands more than Belgium, but if you go to other regions, for instance, the Middle East, there you have abundant space, and also, for instance, a lot more sun than here. So perhaps they could produce green cheaper than we do. And if you can transport it cheap, it might be a competing option. So it will be a matter of market forces and market developments that will determine whether import will become a viable option, I think, or not. Then the question about the backbone and the matter of 3 or 4. Perhaps you don't need it as a first starter for that amount, but developments do not end in 2030. So if you want to proceed after 2030 and industry still has a lot to do for decarbonization after 2030, you'll need to have an infrastructure. So making a backbone available is not only aimed at 2030, but also enabling options after 2030. And you also need to realize that the green route is not the only route followed. There is also, and that was not perhaps shown on the first graph Christophe showed, but there is also an ambition on the blue routes. And I don't have it in my head in terms of volume in of hydrogen, but the CO2 amount in terms of CCS, CO2 stored, and that's mainly from producing blue hydrogen, is in total 10 million tons by 2030, which is a significant amount. So that you'll need to facilitate too. So the backbone has a role to play. It's certainly needed after 2030, and perhaps that's the most important thing to keep in mind. Do not plan actions just for a certain date, but also have to have a look into the next steps beyond 2030, because the road towards 2050 is steep, and time is precious. I see Mark talking, but I can't hear him.
I put myself on mute not to disturb your answer. Thank you for Walter. For I propose we would end the discussion here. Thank you very much for your introduction. It's easier sometimes to get people from abroad here than in a physical meeting. So Walter and Christoph, thank you very much. But I want to keep an eye on the time and to keep our seminar within the timing as foreseen. We have 3 more guests that we will ask questions. 3 more guests from the 3 cabinets. I think the Secretary of State already mentioned that a lot of projects are in the hand of Minister Tine van der Straten. So we have Anne Strooband here, Anne, who is the Deputy Chief of Staff of Mr. van der Straten and responsible for hydrogen within the cabinet. We have Pascal Lehans, who is Climate Advisor for the Walloon Minister of Energy, Philippe Henry. And we have Karl Lauwers, who is Advisor Science and Innovation at the Flemish Minister Hilde Krevits for Economy. Welcome, the 3 of you. We heard from previous speakers the importance of a good regulatory framework, and we also had the word of hope from our Secretary of State for future investments. So let me start off our first question. Where are we for the moment in the hydrogen planning and in the projects on the 3 levels? Perhaps I will start with Anne as first. What's the state of play, ambition, vision, strategy on the federal level?
Hello, thank you for the invitation. Perhaps first of all, on a federal level, we also have a trajectory called the Future of Gas, which is also a study which is ongoing on, of course, the future of gas, including also partly hydrogen. That study will be available for us around April. Which will then or can then be also used to further develop our strategy in terms of hydrogen. At the same time, of course, in terms of the recovery and resilience plan, we have our federal part, including the hydrogen. So, of course, we will build further on getting those projects on track, which is including this regulatory framework, which is including also the clarity between the competences between the federal government and the regional government. So I'm getting very fond of my colleagues here joining today as well. Yeah, to have that backbone launched, of course, we need to have a certain regulatory framework, a certain clear position on who does what within the market, and that we are working on having first ideas on how to get that done. And in terms of the recovery plan, we also have our potential to build or support production facilities on hydrogen within the federal competences, where we also want to look further in when new gas-fired power plants would come, for example, how hydrogen can also play a role in decarbonizing that sector and getting those installations also on track to be part of a system in 2050. As well as how to use hydrogen in, for example, shipping or in applications linked to offshore wind, and also further get those sectors also more climate neutral or even more climate neutral. So yes, we are looking how to support the market, how to get the first projects launched. I would say focus on having the technology and the demonstration projects, as also the minister has shown. Because we do need to be a bit careful, and I agree with the statements. There is still a limited renewable energy production that we have in Belgium. So we need to look at electrification as well. Hydrogen will play a role. We have a large industry, but we will focus also, or need to focus also on the import of hydrogen. Therefore, also the importance of this backbone, because local production alone will probably be difficult in our case, but we can talk about that a bit further on, I understand.
Perhaps I'll go to Pascal in the second place. Pascal, in the Walloon region, what are the priorities for the moment? I believe you are also working on a vision on hydrogen for the Walloon region. And can you give us already some insights in what you're doing and what are the important parts for the industry?
Yes, first of all, thank you for the invitation. I am a very special guest because I replace Dominique Perrin, who is currently at home resting after his operation. Yes, for the Walloon region, we have also a vision in preparation because we do think that hydrogen is probably not the next big thing, but a probable big thing in coming for the energy transition and low carbon transition. So I fully agree with the vision presented by Anne, and we fully agree to work in common to reach the ambitious goals for Belgium in hydrogen. But I still think that hydrogen is an opportunity, a long-term opportunity, and we have, first of all, a full need for electricity in the future. So before talking of much a fluid hydrogen economy, we do need to have power supplies insufficient for Belgium. So we are working first of all on more local ecosystems because of course we are only competent on renewables, so we cannot work on imports, large scale imports for Walloon region. So we are going to build up a regulatory framework that enables the technology in Wallonia, but we are forced to see what the Commission will be giving us as a regulatory framework for the future. Then we are still waiting for the first text. In parallel, we are going to work on a roadmap just to enable the technology fully enable the technology in Walloon region. We are talking about the regulatory framework, yes, but also on milestones for the future until 2050, because we do think that 2050 will be the right goal for the future. We are going also to work. We are also work on low carbon gases, not only on hydrogen, pure hydrogen, but also syngas or biomethane, because we have potential to work on it in a shorter term than 2050. Of course, I am not responsible for research and innovation. We are going also develop probably more intense R&D means in order to help the Walloon industry to develop solutions for the future of hydrogen. We do have some companies and universities that are already working on technologies, and we will see what the future of IPSAI will give us as projects, real projects. So in the next few months, I think we will see more concrete projects emerging in Wallonia. But for my side, because I work for energy and climate, I see at a shorter term ecosystems, as I mentioned, but the sector integration within transport, for instance, or industry is very important, I think, with smaller scale project that the one our colleagues from Netherlands presented just before. But we do think that step by step we can reach a more ambitious goal, long-term ambitious goal within hydrogen. So we are going to build the things calmly, quietly, but with a focus on a long-term ambitious goal within hydrogen.
Thank you very much, Pascal. Karel, you're working for the Minister of Energy and not for Energy, Economy and Innovation, so it's a different angle. Perhaps also the Flemish government already approved, I think, the hydrogen strategy. So what are the priorities for now, and what is the state of play of the situation, the Flemish region?
Yes, welcome to all, and also for me, thank you very much for the invitation. So indeed, just to clarify, I work for the Flemish Minister of Economics and Innovation, where the hydrogen strategy was also written and defended. So of course, if you talk about hydrogen, there is a really big importance for energy, but we believe that for now, especially for there's a big step to do with innovation. So therefore, of course, we work very much together with the colleagues of energy, but especially also the role of hydrogen for economics and our ports. We also believe that it's the core business of our work that we have to do. So indeed, we have published a vision, hydrogen vision for the Flemish government. Especially with a big focus on research and development, both really the scientific research as well as the innovation for companies. We believe that we have to work on a few main points, such as, of course, the production of hydrogen, as well as the first industrial developments, but also the innovation and research for the technology to produce hydrogen. It's been said already before, the green hydrogen is still really expensive. But also to use a hydrogen, for instance, to make together with CO2 new molecules or new fuels in terms of CCU. And also we wanted to lay out a few main topics what we will use hydrogen for, and it was mainly said to use it with a high focus for the industry, because I think in Belgium it's about, my federal colleagues will know better, but about 80% of our energy is electricity. So we have a major challenge to make a green or a sustainable transformation also for our industry, and there we believe that hydrogen has a major role to play. We also, just as Pascal said, don't believe that hydrogen is a holy grail, but it will obviously be necessary for the sustainable transition of our industry, both for energy consumption, but also for as a molecule for the production of different products. Next to industry, we also have a main focus on the heavy-duty transport. So no big surprises there, I suppose. Next, we have a major component about the international collaboration with our neighboring countries. Also, the export of our knowledge. I think with Belgium, and I wouldn't say Flanders alone, but really Belgium, we have a beautiful example, and Anne has a beautiful edit in the back of her with the wind industry and the wind energy. We really can export our knowledge of this sustainable energy in neighboring countries. And so that's really a beautiful thing to do. So by investing in innovation and technology and in research, we can really export this knowledge to other countries as well, which has again a positive effect on the economy here. Obviously, also the import question is really important. It's been said already before. We don't have enough roofs for solar and not enough place for wind energy to make all the hydrogen here ourselves. And last, we have some, we call it flanking measures, but I don't think it's a good English translation. But of course, the policy of everything around the policy. So both, I think we have a constructive meeting already in the past with our federal colleagues and our colleagues from Wallonia, also to start the IPK process. So really a good. We see that hydrogen is more and more important on the Europe scale, on the Belgium scale, on the regional schemes. So a good constructive working together there is really important. And obviously also we now have a Flemish vision on hydrogen, but we see it as a starting point and not as a finishing point. So really a starting point to start with also consultation with the steering committee, consisting of socioeconomic organizations, but of course also industry and research groups to see, okay, what do you think about this vision? What can we do better and what not? We already have a first meeting with FEBEG, which gave a lot of constructive remarks on our vision. And then last, what I wanted to say is that next to this vision, we have also in terms of the RRF 125 million euros to support industrial projects with the IPK hydrogen of Europe. So there we really wanted to make a first step to help the industry get forward to the hydrogen. So that were a few of our main topics that we are working on.
Thank you very much. I think you all had also part of my second question. The priorities for the short term are, I think, Carl, you mentioned them already. But what's the state of play of different projects in the regions? We hear project arising in Walloon region, Flemish region, others. Pascal, can you say something about projects in the Walloon region? How are they going? Is it also in the preparation phase, or are they already projects in a say semi-industrial scale, or how are we going for? What's the way forward?
I won't talk for my colleagues from energy and research, because we are not able to. We are not the minister. I'm not working for the Minister of Research and Economy, so it's a bit difficult for me to talk about the process. But be sure that the IPSAI will be probably the. I see that my colleague is there, so. It's a little bit difficult for me to talk about the future project at our scale. We are going to foresee some new projects within a call of projects that is in preparation. But I can leave the floor to my colleague from the cabinet of the Minister of Economy, which we see here. So maybe Sylviane, you can help me on that question.
She is welcome, of course. So Sylviane, please go.
Okay, thank you, Pascal, and thank you, Mark, for the question. So I'm Sylviane Bilguichet. I'm an advisor to the Minister of Economy, Mr. Willy Borsu. So the Walloon region is well coordinated with the other entities on the IPK initiative. So we made a common call for proposals this last year, sorry. So there are several projects in the pipeline, let's say. So in the Walloon region, we received 7, and well, of course, I cannot enter into the details of the projects, but well, several projects are very relevant, and we see that in the context of the Resilience and Recovery Facility initiative of the European Commission. There are a lot of actors from the Walloon region very interested in several new technologies. So in the context of the RRF, we have a budget for the IPK around 140 million euros, and we also have another part of this project for 20 million to develop green hydrogen. So that's the initiative of the Minister of Energy in the Walloon region. And we also have another initiative, which is a transition to low carbon industry, where hydrogen might also be one of the technologies that will arise. So there we have a budget of 50 million. Up to now, of course, we have to reduce this amount. Well, that's in the process of the RRF, so we will see. But it shows at least commitment of the Walloon government to finance those new technologies, because well, it has been mentioned by several actors. Today, it's a way to deeply reduce emissions in our industries and also in the transport sectors. So well, that's all I can tell you for now. But of course, you can always contact us apart. So thank you.
And notice also the word commitment. I think it's important. I hear a lot of commitment from the four of you, would say the three of you, but I can say now the four of you. Carl, perhaps in the Flemish region, in the projects, I think you're working via VLAIO. It's a specific situation or a specific way of funding together with the IPK projects. How are they evolving, and what are there still opportunities for industry for new projects? What's for the next future, for the next months?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very good question, because what I wanted to say also after the previous speaker is that we sense a great energy within the industrial and research community, both in Belgium, Wallonie and Flanders. So people really see the opportunity of the European RRF budget to really start investing in industry and in innovation. And so also for the Flemish government, we have priorities for the innovation, both on the digital scheme and on the sustainable transformation. And so indeed we have now the IPK hydrogen, but we have also, for instance, general extra budget within the European framework for research and development in general. And so, for instance, for CCU, we also see other opportunities which are also important for our industry. But so indeed, as you said, it's all through VLAIO. So VLAIO are really our experts, the agency who is really the expert both on the helping of the industry to formulate good projects, to give a first look at the projects to see what can we do better or not. Both they also have they are also the experts on the European also way to go. So there you really have a good agency that combines both the European knowledge as well as the innovation and industrial knowledge. And so of course if people here in industry or in research in general have good proposals on sustainable innovation, they can always contact VLAIO to see if through the RFF or the general funding we can help them to implement the project as well. So sometimes people focus on the budget for hydrogen, but in general I think both federal and the regions are committed to really invest in innovation, not only on hydrogen but in general, as a way to go forward after the crisis, and really the way forward for the relance.
Okay, thank you. And in the federal level, I think innovation is more a regional
yes, the real basic innovation. Yes, of course, we also have the Energy Transition Fund, where we are waiting now the result. We had a record of amount of participants at least. So normally by the end of April, we will have a bit more news which projects we can support with that. And of course, it's then also launching the funds and the call for projects which we envisage by the RRF, also from our side.
Okay. If we see the European map and you see what's going on the European level, then I think you need some collaboration with the neighboring countries. We heard Walter, we've seen the ambitions of Netherlands. We heard further on, we have heard James on the examples of France and other countries. Are you working together with your colleagues in neighboring countries? And how is Belgium placed in that? And how do you see that kind of collaboration with the neighboring countries?
I think, first of all, also together with the regions, we are represented in the Penta Forum where hydrogen is discussed. Mark, you as well presented the discussion and the debate within the Benelux organization. So yes, of course, we are trying to align. We are discussing with other member states as well in terms of corporations, how to build the corporations, how to see in terms of that possible backbone interconnections. I believe on that side, Belgium also has a role to play as a possible interconnector, because we are now a large importer of natural gas and exporter. A lot of the natural gas passes through our grids, and why not have the same ambition for hydrogen to be one of the suppliers for other European member states, mainly industrial sites, because also we focus on the industrial usage of hydrogen, so towards Germany, towards the northern part of France. Why not also position ourselves on that side? I think we have much more knowledge in-house than what we are perhaps putting on paper. And all the other countries might have very ambitious goals, but we can still beat them in terms of timing.
Okay. I hear not only consultation, commitment, good collaboration, but also an ambition, a very high ambition. Thank you. Perhaps for last words, I didn't see any questions coming up in the chat. So if someone still has questions, they're welcome. But perhaps I go for the last part to stay a little bit, to stay in the timing foreseen to Carl and Pascal. If there are additional points you want to add, specific points from the point of view in the regions, collaboration between the regions, collaboration with the neighboring regions or within the Penta Forum, special points of attention from your side.
Just maybe me, I know Benelux for a long time now because I was in the administration just before and I was in charge of hydrogen. So it's a 10-year collaboration with them. Until now, I think the collaboration is very good with them. They are very keen on dialogue. So it's a real pleasure to discuss and to work with them. I know Wim is in the attendance, so you can say that to your colleagues. Of course, it's a real pleasure. But the most important thing is that we can discuss on how to build and bridge the gap between the three countries of the Benelux and the 6 countries of the Penta Forum. So it's very important to put that forward and to build projects within that framework that is well established now for several decades. So it's quite important for us to work in that in that framework. So we are going to I have had a meeting with them 3 weeks ago, in which we have ensured that we will work together on the hydrogen, because as well for the recharging station for electric vehicles, I think the cooperation is very good and has led to good project until now. So I think we need such cooperation and collaboration to go forward within Europe. Netherlands taking a part, Belgium taking a part of Luxembourg. We are too small to have a good weight on European decisions. So together it's more easy, but sometimes really difficult, because culturally we are very different, also very different. But I think we have more weight in the discussion with the Commission together than alone.
Thank you, Pascal. Karel, from your side?
Yeah, just for the point of view of collaboration with our neighboring countries, I think it's really important also, for instance, for our ports, which are both for Flanders and both Antwerp and Ghent. They themselves are really looking for collaboration with the neighboring countries, especially the Netherlands. So there, it's really important for us to be ready as well, and to have both a common sense and a common view and a common strategy, as well as also to support those projects. But as I said before, I really sense a big amount of energy, both within the political side, as well as the industry, as well as research, to really go forward, not only hydrogen, but of course hydrogen as well, but really into this sustainable transformation. And so that is really nice for one who's working on the policy side to experience and to really try to work as good as possible, as constructive as possible, to go forward, as I said before, after this crisis, to make the sustainable transition possible.
I have here one question in the chat. The CO2 backbone. All our neighboring countries, including UK, benefit from CO2 storage potential. Probably an interesting future economical driver for them, but I think that's less the case in Belgium. Is this making a CO2 backbone less attractive for us?
I would say it makes it more necessary, because in the end we can also benefit from the storage locations abroad, because we don't have the potential here. So reason the more it's in our interest to make the international agreements and to make agreements to store also our industrial CO2, because unfortunately it will still be a necessity for a while at least.
Thank you, Anne.
Yeah, and to follow up, I think especially in the beginning, we have to see CO2 as a molecule to work with, again together with hydrogen, to make new molecules, to make and to try to really go with the CCU. We don't have, as you said before, we don't have the means to store it immediately, but we have to use it again in this sustainable transformation of our industry.
And you will notice I fully agree with Karl. It's quite to be mentioned here.
Okay. Thank you very much. I noticed a very good collaboration between the three of you. So that is giving hope for a good and an ambitious project for the regions and for the federal level. Thank you all for this discussion, and for everybody who was present. Thank you for joining us in this webinar. I hope see you all again in another webinar in a couple of months of FEBEG on another subject. So thank you all for attending us, and I hope it was an interesting afternoon. Thank you.